Are you craving connection, living away from friends and family, or feeling alone? Well, this is no longer just a podcast. We are Raised Women, the community. Visit raisedwomen.com.au to explore our events and resources created for women just like you. Online and in person if you are in Perth, check us out and join us today. Welcome to Raised Women, the podcast. I'm your host, Tash. We're all about raising women up in faith, life, and the marketplace. Last week, we wrapped up our Caring Culture series. If you're serious about culture through an Aboriginal lens or a faith perspective, I encourage you to go back and listen to the last 3 episodes. They are rich, real, and worth your time. Today we're stepping into a brand new series titled Seasons. And in this series, we're going to talk about one of the most significant topics of all time, relationships, from singleness through to marriage. But before we go there, before we talk about the season of singleness, we need to start at the very beginning. This first episode is titled Before the Person. We're going to explore the often overlooked parts of the story, the things that happen before they enter the scene. And I say they and the person because I genuinely believe this episode isn't just for women, but for the men listening too. So get ready for some practical tips, shared experiences, and biblical truths. Let's get stuck into it. We were designed for connection and relationship with others. And if you didn't know that, you do now. For some people, that relationship is platonic, as there are people genuinely happy about being single. And I do have friends who are fine with this, and that's okay too. This series is more for the romantic-seeking relationship individuals listening in. There are countless scriptures throughout the Bible that not only affirm the importance of relationship, but show us what both healthy and unhealthy ones look like. Think about Samson and Delilah, Abraham and Hagar, Solomon and his many wives, David and Michelle. These were relationships that pushed purpose and calling into the backseat of anointed people's lives. We want to be looking at the Ruth and Boazes, the Josephs and Marys, the Zechariah and Elizabeths, the Priscillas and Aquilas, the ride-or-die OGs in the Bible that were not perfect, but through their unions and relationships, created ripple effects that impacted generations and bloodlines felt to this very day. So before we get there, before we even get to the person, before we step into a romantic relationship, how often do we actually stop to consider the weight of that decision? See, I truly believe one of the most underrated parts of preparing for a relationship is the choice. The active decision we make when we choose to venture down a path that leads to a relational destination often unknown. The path we choose to walk even when we don't fully understand where it leads or what it might cost. Let me share this verse with you. Proverbs 3:21-23 says, "My son, preserve sound judgment and discernment. Do not let them out of your sight. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace your neck. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble." This verse slots into the passage titled Further Benefits of Wisdom. So now when I read it, this is what I get. If you preserve sound judgment and discernment always, the decisions you make will not only lead to life, but will be something others notice about you. And more than that, something you will treasure because your path will be safer, your steps more stable. I think half the time when we're single or even just waiting for the right person, we do overlook the most critical part, the decision itself. Before I met my husband, I was in a long-term relationship with someone else. It started with a text message that turned into multiple messages, calls, and before I knew it, I moved in and we were living together. I was in that relationship for 8 years. It didn't end well. In fact, it left me very broken for a very long time. That brokenness led me into places and situations that were completely outside my personality, calling, and purpose. And looking back at that period, the currency it cost me was time. 4 years after that relationship, hurt dictated so much of what I did. Although not all bad, because like all challenges, it led to the development of who I am today, it was still in so many ways unnecessary. That's why I'm so passionate about this series and speaking about relationships. Not because it's cute or trendy, but because I lived the consequences of what it means to enter a relationship without Proverbs 3:21-23, without discernment, without judgment, without wisdom. So I did stumble. Half the time we're consumed with the connection, the attention, the comfort, the lust, the attraction, the perceived security, that we take an acquaintance and turn it into something more without considering the bigger picture. We don't look ahead to see the ripple effects it could have. We don't ask ourselves what trajectory we're stepping into. So let me be real, because I didn't stop to ask myself this. Is this relationship going to lead somewhere God-honoring? Is this aligned with my calling, my peace, my future? There was no pause, no reflection, no conversation with myself. But there were so many flags there. So I guess what I'm really saying with discernment is, it's about mindfulness, but better yet, practice. When it comes to making wise judgments when aligning yourself with a person, that doesn't mean seeking perfection or looking at someone thinking, hey, you know what? I've just seen you and I'm going to marry you. But as you walk with them, are those little cues and alignments there? Does the relationship reflect God-honoring traits? Is this relationship heading in a direction pleasing to God? And are you calling it as you're making decisions when navigating this union? See, discernment and judgment mean nothing if action and practice don't follow through with it. The next layer we look towards in relationships is the person. That's right, you. You listening in right now. You play such a pivotal role, and I want to take a moment to tell you how and why. When I was preparing this episode, I had a conversation with my husband. I asked him, what do you think is important before getting into a relationship? And he said, being whole and healed as a person. Anything you've not healed from in past relationships will carry over into the next, but be amplified. And honestly, that answers the how and the why. We need to focus on being the best version of ourselves for ourselves before we think about doing life with someone else. You've probably heard the phrase, broken people break things. And it's true. Two whole people, two healed individuals don't make a perfect relationship, but they certainly make a healthier one. God's word is filled with principles that show what this looks like in practice. Ephesians 5:33. Each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. 1 Corinthians 16:14. Do everything in love. Hebrews 10:24-25. Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Let us encourage one another. James 1:19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So you don't need to be a genius or even a Christian to understand that love, respect, patience, and encouragement are shown in these scriptures, and they are key ingredients to healthy connection. But how can someone who isn't healed offer these things consistently? So you cannot pour from an empty vessel or a broken one consistently or sustainably. This is why focusing on becoming the best version of you is so important. And if you are a Christian, having a solid walk too. After the long-term relationship I was in, which I mentioned earlier, there were moments where I did date other people. Nothing serious, but I noticed something. Certain behaviors would trigger me. They would stir distrust, make me feel overly emotional, bring on worry or doubt, and I realized once again I had put myself in relational spaces I wasn't ready for. I, more than anything, wanted a relationship, but I wasn't ready to receive someone, and so one day I prayed a prayer that I'll never forget. I said, God, look, I'm clearly not good at making decisions when it comes to choosing your best for me. And I never want to feel as hurt as I did before because I don't think my heart could take it. God, please carry it and hold it until the person deserving of it comes. Don't let me give it away to anyone if they are not the one you're holding it for. And that prayer held. Even in my marriage today, we've faced situations together that if that had have happened in my past would have completely derailed me. What once would have stirred up distrust, anxiety, or overthinking no longer has the same hold over me. That's not because we are perfect or without challenges, but because real healing has taken place, not just in me, but in my husband too. Those old patterns, those reactions that used to be automatic, they don't show up the same way in our relationship. And that shift is the deep fruit of intentional healing. We've both done the work to confront our wounds so that the way we relate to each other now is marked by peace, trust, maturity, communication, love, and a foundation where we choose to stand on God. In so many ways, journeying out of my past relationship was still imperfect, and the road certainly wasn't easy. But what changed was my focus. My driving force became being the best version of me, for me, not for someone else. If you can relate to this, then I want to really encourage you to pursue this version of yourself. When you pour time, energy, words, and presence into someone else, the reality is it's either going to water the seeds of a relationship or kill it. They deserve the best version of you, someone who can love them the way they deserve to be loved. But you deserve that too. And here's why. So that you can discern your value and your worth and recognize what you are truly deserving of in a relationship and not anything less than that. Because that version of yourself is not a fantasy. It's a choice. And it's a choice you are fully in control of making before you step into a relationship. The last section I wanted to touch on briefly for now, but we will revisit it in greater detail another time, is marriage. Let's pause on that word for a moment, marriage. Why do you think marriage is so often seen as the outcome or goal in a relationship? Why does it matter so much? Some people might say, but I'm happy without that kind of commitment. Others might believe marriage isn't necessary. Two people love each other and are happy, then that should be enough, right? And in a world that champions personal freedom and reinvents traditional values, these questions are completely understandable today. But as a woman of faith, I don't just look at what culture says, I look at what God says. In Genesis 2:24 it says, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and they will become one flesh." Jesus himself reaffirms this in Matthew 19:4-6, saying, "So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." These scriptures don't speak of marriage as a cultural construct, a man-made agreement, or a romantic gesture. They speak of oneness, of covenant, of something divinely joined, not casually chosen. See, God puts boundaries around relationships, not to restrict us, but to protect us. That is a fundamental truth I've come to understand through my own story. The way God designed relationships, moving from friendship to courtship to covenant, is not random. It's not outdated. It's deeply intentional. Marriage is not just a romantic idea. It is a protective framework meant to guard hearts, homes, children, futures, legacies, entire generations. And I want you to hear this clearly. This is not about me making judgment. This is not about saying one way of life is better than another to make someone feel shame. This is about bringing understanding. It's about asking ourselves, not just, am I happy in this, but is this the fullness of what God has for me? Why is marriage the goal of a relationship? I mean, think about it. Because God's word gives us a blueprint for healthy, honoring, and holy relationships that carry the weight of love through seasons of joy, suffering, change, and growth. To be honest, when I look back at my own story, I don't know exactly what my future would have looked like had I stayed, but based on where we were heading, the choices being made, and the dysfunction we were carrying, I can say that the likely outcome would have been children who were loved, but living in a broken home, or worse, an unhappy one. There's no shame in facing that truth. There is wisdom in it, because when we think about relationships, our minds naturally go to the euphoric parts, the butterflies, the romantic gestures, the lovey-dovey moments. And those are beautiful, but what happens when that feeling fades? What happens when that person doesn't look the same after 50 years? What happens when life gets hard? What happens when love is tested, not by grand gestures, but by silent mourning, stretched finances, or conflicting moments? When all the excitement wanes, where are you heading together? What does your commitment now look like? Not now, but for life, for your family, your children, your legacy. Marriage in God's design is a sacred covering. It's not the finish line of love. It's the starting point of a covenant and companionship. And that matters, not just for your own heart, but for the generations that come after you or are impacted by you. So as you reflect on this kind of relationship you want, go deeper than feelings and ask yourself, where is this going? Is it aligned with God's best for me? And is it building something worth protecting? In wrapping up this episode, we have explored the importance of the decision when discerning the right person. We have unpacked how essential it is to pursue wholeness within yourself before entering a relationship. And finally, we looked at marriage as the intentional outcome of a God-honoring connection. Here are a few reflection questions to sit with if anything from today's episode has resonated with you. Have you ever stopped to consider the weight of entering a relationship? Is there anything you need to heal from before stepping into something new? What version of you do you want to bring into a future relationship? If you're already in a relationship, do you see yourself marrying them? Thank you for joining me in this conversation today. Let this be a moment to pause, to reflect, to realign, because navigating relationships before the person is the most important step you can take. Visit raisedwoman.com.au to find out how to journey with us. And don't forget to join me next week as we continue to explore this beautiful series and the beauty and purpose of a season of singleness. Until then, I'm your host Tash, and this is Raised Woman, the podcast. Stay blessed.